beautiful. We are live. The volume is going. Perfect. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another camera class. Today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. It is the second Thursday of the month, and that would mean that it is the intermediate camera class. For those of you who have done this before or are just joining us, my name is Saxon. I am the camera class instructor. We've been doing this for the past few years. This class is offered both in person and online. So for everybody watching at home, thank you. If you ever want to come in person, you can always do that. We're here at Apt Electronics at 1200 North Milwaukee Avenue. Without further ado, let's get into this. So today is intermediate camera knowledge, and let me make sure that this thing's set up so y'all can see it right. That should do it. Perfect. So let's break that. Let's talk about it. So what did we do last week? So last week was our Intro to Cameras class. And the Intro to Cameras class is very simple and straightforward. We're really learning on how to use the automatic setting, how to keep things simple. We don't want to bog ourselves down with the manual controls. Those will come with time. So we start by learning the controls of the camera, the button layouts, where things are. We talk about SD cards in the first class. We talk about lenses, how to understand millimeters, focal length, distortion of the lenses, what lenses are the most common, and then kind of where else to go for help when we need to troubleshoot, when we need to get, more assistance. Intermediate cameras, though, we want to get away from all of that. We want to start to recognize the camera as a tool. It's not just a device that takes photos. It's something we can manipulate and control in order to get what we want from it, the results that we're looking for. And so what we're really going to be breaking down today is the more art and the, let's say, artistic side of shooting and how to go about some of the main controls, and then what other controls you should need to know as a photographer. First and foremost, why do we go more advanced, whether it's a point and shoot, a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, which again, we also talked about all three variations of those cameras last week. But the reason we go more advanced is, again, to use the camera as a tool. When you're buying a camera, you can come in and buy a camera that costs $400 at the entry level, $200 entry level, and you can buy cameras that I sell downstairs for all the way up to $9,000. They all have different functionalities and features and doodads, if you will, to them. But the real question is what are all those and why are they on the camera? They're there to help with something, right? There is a reason for each button to exist on the camera. It's not just flavor. It's not just added extra bits. It's there for a reason. So going more advanced, whether it be these three models, a film camera, whatever it is that you're using, it's to take advantage of those buttons, to take advantage of those features, those things that will turn your entry-level photograph into something that is more pristine and priceless looking. To share kind of what I'm going to be looking at and explaining today, I have my difference between what I call a snapshot and a photograph. About a year or so ago, I took this picture on my cell phone. I cropped it. It was meant to be quick and easy. To me, this is a snapshot. This might be something that I send to my friends to say, hey, I'm standing over here at this part of the store. Come meet me here. Maybe I'm just taking a quick picture to send to somebody and say, hey, look at how cool this little ceiling is. I'm not putting thought into it. I'm not putting energy. I'm pointing, I'm clicking, I'm just taking a snapshot. To me, a photograph, to actually participate in the act of photography, takes a little bit more manual control. This is what I then was able to take with my camera, and I had a few different things to my disposal. First and foremost, I looked at my aperture, my ISO, and my shutter, arranged those to get the best type of picture possible. Using focus parameters, I added a level to my screen to make sure that I was even completely through. I changed my white balance to tone it down a little bit for more incandescent lighting. I also then changed my light metering area so that it was more centered, so I could get this more smoky appeal on the edges. Again, it sounds complex, and what I went through is more or less what every regular photographer, when you're shooting more professionally and you're getting more into it, would think about as they're shooting. It's stuff that in the very beginning of you getting ready to become a photographer and learning this that might seem a little complicated, but through time, practice, and effort, it really will all come together. What we're really going to be focusing on today is all of the pieces that went into taking a photo like this. So the goal from the end of this should be to take our photography from a snapshot and have something that's more magical, like a photograph. And at any point, guys online, interrupt, ask questions as you have them. You're in the same boat. Any questions you got, interrupt me. Step one, learn your camera. This is a pretty simple and straightforward one, but you'd be surprised how many people buy these. They don't want to learn much about it. They just expect it to do what they want. It's important to remember that, like anything, whether it's a car, whether it's a computer, whether it's a cell phone, there's some form of manual with it. Whether they include it in the box or not, there is a manual or an operational guide or a step-by-step instruction on this thing. So step one, learn your camera. Master your camera. It's great to be knowledgeable in Nikon or Sony or Panasonic or whatever it might be, but your one singular camera you own, you should know every little detail about it. So that way, in order to, correct a problem, you know where the problem starts at to find it. Step two in this is we're going to revisit the mode dial. So last week during my class, I compared the mode dial to the gear shift of your car. I look at the mode dial as the ability for you to switch your car from park, neutral, reverse, and drive. The mode dial is no different. It's the operational aspect of your camera that controls the brains. Last week, I said stay on automatic. I wanted everybody to feel comfortable in shooting the camera, using it. It's, great if you kind of understand it a little bit, but when you jump into something like manual control or aperture or shutter and you don't have the experience of using it, what tends to happen is you become overwhelmed or bogged down by it, and now you don't want to pick this up at all anymore. It's important to remember that cameras are very complicated and they can, take a long time to learn. So whenever we're in doubt and we just want to be able to take photos, stick to automatic, let these new smart cameras do the operational aspect. You just point, click, and shoot, frame. However, we want to break past those and move into next steps. So again, automatic, first and foremost. Start with auto. Auto is fantastic. It's your starting point. It's a great way to get into the camera without having to learn anything. Program auto is my second one, so the P on your camera. Program auto is everything automatic is, except now there are some features and controls you can change. White balance, light metering mode, focus parameters, exposure compensation, the burst speed of your photo, the timer of your photo. These are now things that you can update and change in Program Auto. They give you some manual controls, but again, the camera is still going to do the main function, which is aperture and shutter. Which then leads me into the next two, aperture and shutter priority. The name is basically just giving advantage to whatever is before it. So if we're shooting aperture priority, the only thing we manually control is aperture. If we're shooting shutter priority, the only thing we manually manipulate is the shutter. And in full manual, the training wheels are completely off. Now, everything that's between program to shutter priority is at our fingertips. We can adjust, control, and manipulate things based on what we see in front of us. At the end of this class, one of the things I'm going to do is show images, and I'm going to talk about all of the three things that I see in there as far as aperture, shutter, and ISO are concerned. And the reason I'm going to show that off is because those three are the most important. That is what we would call the exposure triangle. And I like doing this chart variation because when it comes to the triangle, some people get a little confused. They think if you move one way up the triangle, you got to move the same direction. And that is just not the case. Each three of these aspects of photography have been around since film, and they continue to be a part and aspect of photography today. In my opinion, the most important aspect of photography are these three things. And if you can learn them and understand them and learn how to control and move with them and grow with them is the way I should say that, then you really will never have a problem when you're shooting. It'll just be learning how to adjust and how to quickly adjust so you don't miss the shots. Let's start by breaking down each one of these individually, and then at the very end, we'll talk about how they all come together. Starting with our aperture. So aperture is very simple. Aperture controls one very important aspect in photography. Each of these, I should say, control one aspect in photography, but they affect one other thing. We're going to talk about each one of those. Aperture controls one thing, and that's the foreground to background separation. The way that aperture works is that your metal shutters that are in your lens, let's make this a little simpler. Your eyeball. On your eyeball, you have a black dot, your pupil, your iris. Your iris becomes bigger or smaller depending on the amount of light that's in the area. If you have a lot of light available, your iris gets very small to let in just a small little bit of light. Your eye doesn't need that much. When it's very dark at night and you're sleeping and you wake up to go to the bathroom or to get some water, your iris is wide open because there's no light. It needs all of its power to see. That's why when you flip the lights on in the middle of the night, it burns, it hurts, because your eyes are exposed. Your camera's lens is moving back and forth in the similar way that our iris of our eye works. It's getting bigger or smaller depending on how much light we need. In this case, aperture works on a two-part scale. One of them is your background to foreground separation. To make it simple, when your number is at the largest aperture it can be at, your iris is at the smallest it can be. And when your aperture is at the smallest number it can be, it's at the largest sized iris it can be. That being said, when we look at this stick figure standing in front of the pyramids, at f22, we can clearly see our stick figure, which is the foreground, and our pyramids, which is the background. So what our aperture is doing here is flattening the image. It's taking the foreground and the background and putting them on the same plane so it's a flat image. If you're with the family and you guys are in front of the Leaning Tower and you want to get a picture of the tower and your family, you're going to want to use something closer to this number. If, let's say, now you and the family get up close to a brick wall, the lighting's really good, and you just want to get a nice portrait picture, you might not necessarily care about the brick wall. We can slowly but surely start to lower our aperture in order to just focus in on the foreground.
Is there a way to flip that?
No. You can focus in. So like, for example, if you wanted to at f1.4, just change your focus parameters. Instead of focusing in on the stick figure, focus in on the pyramid, and now the stick figure will be blurred out. But whatever the main target that you're focusing in on, it'll blur the rest away based on the aperture that you have. Now, again, my example of using it with the pyramids here, where if you wanted to get the background in the picture, might be a great option. If you didn't want to get the background in the picture, you can blur it out a little bit. The next aspect within this is light. The smaller your iris is, so the bigger your number is, the less light you're letting into the camera. And the wider it is, the smaller the number is for your aperture, the more light you're letting in. Which then, in my opinion, answers a big question. Why do you have so many of these when if f22 is perfect and f1.4 is perfectly blurred out? And the reason is that variable change. Depending on the light that you have, the situation that you're in, that will affect how you're controlling your aperture. Now, to simplify it a little bit more and to keep moving forward with it, let's look at some images and we'll relate them back. In the picture on the left, you have the dog and the dog's nose. They're the primary front foreground of our image, and the dog in the background is our background. We can clearly see the nose up close and personal. We can see some water or some snot on the whiskers. You can see the hair follicles, all the little ridges and grooves in the nose. The dog in the background, though, other than the pink collar and some of the color variations, you can't really see exactly where its eyes are looking or the finer details of the nose and the fur and the hairs. If we relate that back to the chart, we're probably sitting somewhere at f11 to f5.6, right? f11 to 5.6, you can kind of tell that's a pyramid behind the person, but you can't see the crisp lines on the pyramid or how detailed the shadow or any of that is. It's a little bit washed out, yet our foreground is still nice, crisp, and clear. Flip-flop to the squirrel. We can see the squirrel's eating. We can see it standing on a piece of wood, whether it's a dead branch or whatever have you. We can tell by the greenery behind it that it's probably some sort of bush or shrub or tree, but we can't make out the individual pieces of that branch. It's all blurred out. It's kind of hazy, if you will. Anyway, comparing that to our chart, now we're probably sitting somewhere at the f1.4, the f2, maybe that f2.8. Depending on lighting conditions, depending on our ISO, our shutter speed, that's really the reason why this many versions of Aperture exist, why there's so many numbers on your lens when you purchase one. That being said, I like this image to kind of sell the point of how Aperture affects the light. We can tell that the deep is our higher number aperture, f22, f11, and our shallow aperture is that 1.4, is that 2, that 2.8. One of the biggest differences that you might notice when you're looking at this should be the dog. At the higher numbers, you can see how much more dark the fur is in its darkest points. The shadows overcome, you lose out on individual strands of hair, the eye gets lost in there, there's more shadow in the crotch area. But as you move to the shallow area, you can see the eye is more in detail. The fur lightens up on the other side. The dog doesn't look gray, it looks white now. It's another aspect. The higher on the aperture number that you go, the darker your image can appear. The smaller on the aperture that you go, the lighter your image can appear because the more light you're letting into the lens. So aperture not only controls your depth of field, but it also controls how much light is entering into the camera. Which leads into why we would use aperture priority mode. The best part about using priority modes is that your camera is compensating on the rest of the work for you. So for example, when we talk about the images, when we talk about our exposure or our aperture chart here, if we switch to 1.4, the camera will take a look at how much light is in front of us as we're focusing and scanning the area before we take the picture. And it will determine how much ISO is needed and what speed the shutter needs to be in order for us to capture the image the way the camera sees it. That's the beautiful part about aperture or the priority modes. You're just focusing in on one primary function of the camera. So I think this picture sells it really well for priority mode for aperture. If you and the missus, your girlfriend, your cousin, your sister, your wife, whoever it might be, were going on a vacation and you had a setting like this, you might not necessarily be worried about the lighting or the speed of the shutter, but you might be concerned on just making sure you get a crisp image of both her and this beautiful background with it as well. Using something like aperture priority, you're just allowing yourself to focus on the background to foreground separation of the camera. You're taking away the rest of the hassle, the rest of the work, and focusing in. Maybe she didn't necessarily want the entire background. Maybe she wanted to sit down on the rocks there and just take a fun photo of her looking off into the distance, and you wanted to blur out the background a little bit. You have the ability to do that with aperture priority. And being able to switch and change things and allow the camera to do the rest of the work for you might make your portrait taking, your vacation photography, your street walking photography to the next level, because you're preventing yourself from needing to do all this extra work with full manual, but you're still using the camera as a tool to get the perfect amount of blur or separation between your foreground and your background. And too, like you were asking, if you see that pyramid in the distance, but you want to blur everything else out, this doesn't have to just be for portraits. This could be for if you have a tree that's standing by itself in the middle of the woods and you think that would be awesome. You want to blur the rest out. You can do that. You're out and you see this rock formation that's standing on the left side of her. You want to blur everything out but the rock. You can do that type of thing. Wherever you focus the camera and then play with aperture priority, that'll put your foreground into perspective versus the rest of the background. Now, when we are using aperture priority, the camera is automatically updating our shutter to give us the best or most appropriate shutter for the aperture we're trying to use. Again, that's the intelligence of the camera. When we switch to shutter priority, Now we're flip-flopping it. So the camera's now going to take everything we just talked about with Aperture, and it's going to run it itself. It's got whole control. We are now controlling the speed of the camera. And you might be wondering why that's important. And that's because not everything is still. Not everything doesn't move. When we're taking portraits or landscape or architecture photos, we can get away with not having to worry about it. Nothing's moving, nothing's running, nothing's, got motion to it. But when you add motion, now is where you have to think a little bit. So for shutter priority, we look at everything within a second. And from there, then, if you're bad at math, like myself, it goes to fractions, which nobody likes. However, we have our names of ifs and percentage. I don't even know how you word it, but regardless, let's start with it. With this, I would say your average kind of regular speed is anywhere between 1/125th of a second, which I'd say about 1/500th of a second. Average, standard, easy photo, 1/60th of a second is probably average as well, too, for everyday photography. When things are moving quickly, we want to make the number larger. We want to go up on the scale. 1/500th of a second is capturing this gentleman or this stick figure as it's jogging. As we slow down, though, we lose the ability to keep the clearness or the precise, sharp edges of the image because it's moving faster than our camera can capture it. So this jogging person, as we get closer to 1/4 of a second, 1/30th of a second, you can see that it's becoming fuzzy, it's becoming blurry. Our camera's not firing fast enough to capture movement. So shutter priority exists so that way we can set the speed at which we'd like to capture the moving objects. And typically we're setting this because something in front of us is moving quick enough that if we were to use aperture priority or automatic mode, it's not going to be quick enough to get that. When it comes to sports, and I have a lot of parents and folks who come in here asking me questions for their kids' sports or for how they can get stuff better for videos, one of the first things I talk about is that in order to freeze action, we've got to be looking at big numbers here. 1/1000th or faster for most sports, even at the kids level age, is appropriate when you're shooting. So keep that in mind. If, you got a girlfriend who's running a 5K and, they've got like a 7 or 8 minute mile pace, might not necessarily be Usain Bolt fast, but that's still fast enough that a speed of at least a 1/1000 would be warranted. If you're taking pictures of birds or running or motion of any kind, that's where you should be thinking as far as speed is concerned on shutter priority. You can always go faster than that. You can always try to cut down. But again, you look at things like this. He's not in the air for very long. It's a split second that he's in the air. Not only is he moving, but so is every individual drop of water. You can see the haziness that kind of elapses or moves around him because of the fact that the water is moving so much faster than he is. However, the speed at which this camera was firing was able to get him in perfect still motion. So that's another aspect to think about. Giving a sense of motion in images is hard to do, but it can happen, and especially it happens within the blur of the photo. So that kind of just goes to say that blur is not always necessarily a bad thing about pictures. I talk about it in the intro class to stay away from blurry pictures or when you're moving, stay still, stay stationary. But one of the things I don't mention is if the object is not stationary or is continuously moving. And with this case, hummingbirds flap their wings at such a fast rate, it's unbelievable. For them to be able to get this image not only perfectly still in the body, but to have a little bit of sense of motion on the wings, it really is a nice looking photo. You can see the bug that's hanging in the bird's mouth, the beak color, and even just the feathering as it goes down the body is really nice, from the yellows, the blues, the greens, the browns, that umber color as well too. So don't be afraid of a little bit of blur. It can help give a sense of motion. And when we have things that are moving this quick, sometimes that motion is what sells the liveliness of the photo. So we've been talking about using fast speeds to capture photos, but there's another inverse of using slow speeds. Long exposure. Saturation is what we're looking at. For a lot of us, when we're taking photos, I always say that 80% of the photo comes out of your camera. 20% of the photo is then what you do on the computer to manipulate it, to change the colors, to boost the contrast, to make the exposure darker or lighter. Your camera can naturally do this for you and create beautiful and detailed shots if you just allow the shutter to stay open for a prolonged period of time. We call this long exposure. You'll see variations of this for astrophotography. You see these kind of moving images where they'll take pictures of skylines of cities with cars moving back and forth. What it really is that you're setting your camera in a stationary point. This could be on a tripod, this could be on a rock, somewhere where it's not going to move, because any movement from the camera and the photo's done. From there, then, you're letting the camera stay open for 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 seconds. It doesn't have to be long. Some people will do very long ones. It's incredible what they're able to get. But again, we're just talking about a short little bit of time. From there, what's happening is that the camera's sensor is open for longer periods of time. It's able to pick up more light, more detail, more information is rushing into the camera's sensors. Therefore, the color becomes more extreme. The contrasts become more extreme. And where you see it on a photo like this is the moss. You look at the different colors of moss and you can see the variations. Up here, we've got dead foliage in between the green foliage. And the green even has a neon, a dark, a mid-tone. Into the rocks, you could still make out the different formations. And just like with our surfer, where when we look at the whites of the water, we see the blurriness. We're seeing the same thing on this one. Because while the water is moving in a systemic or a systematic pattern, and we can see it flowing in these really amazing, beautifully saturated areas, there's still this cool haze that's coming around because, again, it's sporadic. It's not continuously continuous. So it's really cool what you can do with long exposure.
So this is kind of like the hummingbird picture where a little bit of blur actually gives it
Pops.
a little bit of a
Advancement.
Like a different feel to it, but it works.
100%. I would say blur in a lot of the cases can be distracting and somewhat harmful to a photo. But when photos need to feel life and they need to feel it, sometimes it's not just about the color or the saturation or the contrast. It's that little bit of motion that's in there that then sells it. Again, for hundreds of years, or not hundreds of years, but probably for a good 50, 60 years until they figured out how to do video and taking, 7 or 8 photos in one row to make a second scene. This was the way that you would show motion within the images. You give that kind of sense of personality. So, like I talked about with Aperture, right? When we look at Aperture, the main point of Aperture is to control the foreground to background separation. One of the other aspects is that when you go too high with Aperture, you're not letting a lot of light in, so it can become dark. And when you go too low with Aperture, you let a whole lot of light in, and that might be too much. Shutter has the exact same inverse. So again, what's the main point of shutter? You've got something that's in motion. You want to freeze the motion. You want to get it at the perfect frame so that way the image looks bright. The shutter speed is designed to do just that. You set the speed, and that should then ensure that you capture what it is in a freeze frame motion. However, the faster we start to set our shutter speed, the darker the image gets. Because again, we're not letting light come into the camera for a very long period of time. So the faster it goes, the darker the image becomes. The slower it goes, the more light we're bringing into the image. On that flip side, though, the slower we go, the more of a chance we have for blur. The faster that we go, the more of a chance that we have to freeze the image. So it's a catch-22 there. That leads me into why use shutter priority. And again, I'm a big fan of when customers email me photos. I get a kick out of it. This is one that a woman emailed me probably about 2 years ago, and I've kept it ever since. Bought a camera, was really confused why she couldn't take pictures of her boyfriend's Ultimate Frisbee games downtown. And I was like, well, bring it in, let's take a look at it. And we learned that she was on automatic. She had no clue how to use the shutter priority. And she didn't even know really what shutter was. She expected the camera just to kind of do the work. And this is where I think it's great to get away from the automatic setting. Because your camera on automatic is great. It can read light very well. It can process what's background to foreground. It's great in that regard. But the second you introduce speed, you introduce moving objects, your camera has a difficult time finding the appropriate speed in order to capture that in still motion. Using something like shutter priority allows for aperture and ISO to all be controlled automatically through the camera. You are just dictating how fast you want this to fire. So if you're out and about, it's your kid's baseball game, you know that kids are going to be running back and forth doing this, you might benefit from staying on a shutter priority mode the whole time. If you're going whale watching and you know these suckers are going to be jumping out constantly left and right, keeping shutter priority on and just manipulating the shutter back and forth till you get the right speed might be the best thing for you. The reason being is that it's the only thing that you're controlling as you're shooting. You don't necessarily have to fiddle with the rest. The last thing to talk about that ties all of the other aspects together, the aperture and the shutter, is the ISO. ISO has a very technical, scientific name, and if you ask me that name, I'm going to tell you to Google it, because I always forget it, and again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, I don't make that money. I just know it's ISO or ISO. ISO or ISO has been around forever. When film came out, film has a name, or let's start with this. For years and years and years, photography worked with film. You put this film in your camera. You use the oh my God, I'm drawing a blank now. The lever, it's not rotation. Oh man. Anyway, use the lever. It would pull the film through. You'd snap a picture. From there, you'd pull the film again. On your physical camera, the two numbers that you controlled were your aperture and your shutter, and that was it. You said, this is how fast I want the shutter to be open for. This is what I want my aperture to be at. You take the photo, and that was what you got. When you developed the film, you'd see what was there. On the film, as time went on, they started putting numbers on there. Kodak 400, Fujifilm 200, Porta 800. And what was happening there is that you were buying film that already had a predetermined set sensitivity towards it. So you knew that when you shoot with 800, this is the type of environment that you're in. These are the settings that you'd have. And if you didn't know that, you'd buy a light meter and you'd meter the light to see, okay, if I'm on 800 film, my camera should be set at this aperture and this shutter. When digital photography came out, they realized that the camera's sensor can be manipulated to be any style of film that we want, any type of sensitivity. And ISO is just that. It's sensitivity towards light. The lower the number, the less sensitive it is. The higher the number, the more sensitive it is. When we look at ISO 100 and compare it to 800, we can see how much brighter, how much vibrant the image is, how much more vibrant the image is. We can start to see things like the beach starts to lighten up. The water starts to show more reflection and be less dark and oversaturated and contrast on the bottom. It's the little tweaks like that that can move the photo into more of a dramatic or solemn kind of state, or into more of a light or kind of friendly state, depending on how high or what sensitivity you turn it at. Another image or another version of that could be this. ISO is a great example of when you set your camera to be whatever aperture and shutter you want it to be. ISO is typically something you manipulate afterwards to make sure your camera is taking in enough light based on your other two settings.
So how would the first image be different if you just lowered the shutter speed to let in more light?
See, that's where you can. Now that's where it depends on what you're doing. So again, if you're at ISO 100 with this type of day, you're probably not at the appropriate amount for ISO. You probably want to move up a little bit to a 1600 or to an 800. The same problem is, though, if you go slower on the shutter, do you have a tripod with you? Because if you go too low on shutter, it doesn't matter how stable you are. If you shake even just a little bit, it comes up. So the lower you have a shutter speed, the more stability that you need. That's why with the ISO, they give you this nice range, because then you can change it based on the sensitivity that you need. At a certain point, you don't want to go too low with your shutter unless, again, you have the stability, you have like, the platform, the tripod, or unless there's not much moving in front of you.
So is this where like your options come in of like, okay, I have a tripod, so maybe I don't need to work with the ISO as much. I could do more shutter speed.
Well, this is where you get that personal, like this is where it's fun within the manipulation of being the photographer, right? You have the ability to realize, okay, I know that by changing my ISO to a higher number, I'm going to get more light. But maybe that's not the goal I'm after. Maybe I want this to look more doomy and gloomy. I can keep my ISO lower and then manipulate other aspects of my camera to help me achieve. Right now, what this is mainly showing in like this type of thing is to say if I keep the same shutter and the same aperture and I take 5 different photos with different ISOs, is that going to change? And we can clearly see as we go from 100 to 1600 the change in light and within what the clarity of the photo is. Now, ISO has one big thing that we need to talk about too, and that's noise. So ISO obviously sets your camera to have better sensitivity based on what it is you're trying to take a photo of. If you have a lot of light already existing in the image and you go to update the ISO and change its sensitivity to something greater than what it really needs, what can tend to happen is noise. You get images that create this kind of staticky or that kind of, what's the term I'm looking for? The sprite on the TV kind of look, the static. You can get this over noisy, overexposed image that doesn't necessarily lead it to look bad, but it makes the clarity go down tremendously. In DSLR cameras, this is more common. In mirrorless cameras nowadays, typically the screen just becomes whitewashed and you lose all the color and everything else. Now, this might also answer your question better. Automatic ISO. I'm a big fan of auto ISO, and I will tell you why. I had a mother years ago who came in to start taking my class. She wanted to learn. Her kids were in high school, getting ready for prom, getting ready for all this stuff. So she wanted to not only get the camera, but she was going to become the main person to do all these photos. And one of the things that, as she was practicing and learning, that she got very confused on was automatic ISO. And when do you use it? Why does it matter? Is it better to manipulate? And the answer truly is it's your preference. Keeping your ISO to automatic allows for you to think about one less thing, right? You can go shoot. You know that the camera's manipulating and adjusting its ISO based on light. You can then control and do all the other things manually, or you can still have them be automatic. So again, if you want to shoot in manual and control aperture and shutter at the same time, but you're not necessarily concerned about something like the the ISO, you can do that as well too. But I told her when using automatic ISO, one of the best places to do it would be if you're taking photos both indoors and outdoors. If you're walking around and you're going to different spots and you're doing something where you're going to be in a different environment in XYZ places, the benefit to using something like auto ISO is that. It's the fact that when you're indoors or you're outdoors, the camera will automatically manipulate and update itself so that way it gives you the best option of light and light saturation for the area that you're in. Set my camera up, there we go. Now again, to review and to go over everything before we look at some images, Aperture is dealing with two concepts. Foreground to background separation is the first one. At a higher number, at f16, we are now getting the background and the foreground in good clarity. At f1.4, we are starting to blur the background out and just focus in on the main subject matter, our foreground. With that too, the higher we have our aperture, the less light we're letting in the camera. The lower we have our aperture, the more light we're letting into the camera. Shutter speed also works as a twofold. The faster that we move, the higher we set the camera shutter to, so 1 1,000th of a second, the better chance we have to stopping something that's in motion and pausing it, freezing the frame. The slower we set it, the more chance we have for blur or for motion. On the flip side of that, the faster that we set our image, the darker the image can become. The slower we set the image, the lighter the image can become. ISO really only works for one fold, and that is it's the light sensitivity. It's our ability to allow light to enter the camera and to make our camera's sensor more susceptible to that light. In this imagery, though, too much ISO based on the setting that we're in, the more chance we have for noise. And for mirrorless camera shooters, the thing you should be worried about is washing your image out, getting a completely white or a bright image, something that looks like it's been overexposed or is just washed out in color because you have it set too high. That's the mirrorless thing you should be worried about. Now, if you can control all three of these and do all of that, then you are officially using manual control, which I think I have on another slide, so we'll talk about that in a second. But now, let's break down. So I talked about in program auto, there's a few other settings and things that you can control in the P setting. Those also fall under the manual control, and I think that's important to talk about. One of them being exposure. Now, this is the one people always ask. What's the difference between exposure and ISO? ISO is the sensitivity towards the light that your camera has. You manipulating the sensitivity on the settings of your camera is you telling your camera to be more sensitive towards the light, therefore bringing in more light into the camera. Exposure makes the image brighter or makes the image darker based on your preference. It's taking the parts of exposure, which are typically the areas of contrast within your photo, and darkening them or brightening them based on what you want. It's kind of a nice little bit of a cheat code if you've already set your other things on your camera to be where you want them to be. So if you've already set your aperture, your shutter, and your ISO, and you're like, no, this is the exact settings that I need, but the image still looks a little too dark or a little too light. Positive numbers will raise the exposure, making it brighter, and those negative numbers will then lower it, making it a little bit darker. So it's a nice way, if you've already set your camera and done the controls you want, if there's a little extra toying or meddling you need to do, that's how I would do it. I mentioned this earlier too, but light metering. Your camera has an advanced sensor on it. That's that little rectangle piece on the inside that I beg you please never touch with your bare fingers. That is the brains, is the main portion that does almost all the work for your photos. Without that, you'd basically just have a paperweight. Within that sensor, though, it can monitor and meter light in interesting, fun ways. Ways that don't necessarily lead to a better, crisper picture, but they can lead to a more fun. It can be gloomy. It can be more seductive. It could be more, lighthearted. It takes light and makes it interesting. It bends it, if you will. And by bending it, I mean it reads it from a different part of its sensor. So the three main parts that you'll see across the board, depending on what you're shooting on, multi, center, and spot. Multi looks at the points, or looks at light from different points of the sensor, so it uses the whole sensor. Center is just looking at light from the middle and what's radiating from it. So I like to think about that as like a candle in a dark room. You got the candle light, and then you get that little like flicker of light that radiates off of it. That's what the center will look like. And then spot is only from the dead center portion of the sensor. That's where you really can get some dramatic effects around the lens, make it look a little bit more smoky or hazy or shadowy based on the way that you're setting this. Because if it can only read light from one portion of the sensor, you're naturally going to get more dark spots. But depending on what you're looking to do, that could be fun. And if you're shooting on Sony or Canon, they've got their own versions too. Entire screen average and then a partial screen average. So again, depending on your camera, should be a quick thing in your menu shortcut system. You should be able to find light metering, and you can then dictate what you want it to have. And there's a lot of fun that you can have with this. Is it necessarily going to, make or break your photos? Probably not. But is it a really cool thing to play with that could add a little bit of pizzazz to the imagery? I think so. Ooh, my camera's freaking out. 1 second, people. 1 second. This happens from time to time. They set me up with a great new camera setup to make it look a little more professional, and sometimes it's just too much. Okay. And it's going back and forth. Come on. Okay. You know what? We're just going to undo this. And I think everyone can still hear me, so I think that's all that matters. Let me see if I can switch to... See, every time I click on it. All right, I'm just not going to click on it. All right, let's get back into this. So, moving past that point, let's go into the white balance settings on the camera. So, light metering is one aspect for you to measure the contrast, the shadows, the highlights, the areas of points where that might be a factor. The next thing to look at is your white balance presets. Now, white balance refers to the color of white, because as the sun and as light expresses itself, we learned that it's a spectrum for the color white. I forgot which famous Victorian scientist figured this out. They took a beam of light, they put it through a pentaprism, and they were able to create a rainbow. And through that, we were able to realize that light has different temperatures. We measure that color temperature on what we call the Kelvin scale. For lack of a better term, the way that my photography teachers taught me, the bluer the color, the more dead it looks. The redder the color, the more alive it looks. That's why our skin naturally has rosy complexions, has more of a red tint to it or a lighter tint. And as soon as you're sickly or you pass or something were to happen, your body becomes colder. It becomes more on the blue side of things because that blood or the heat that's running through us goes away. Light works the same way. Depending on the type of area that you're in, light can then be changed. Therefore, the color white changes, and that can dramatically affect our images. I won't read all of these out loud because each one's about a little paragraph. But again, in your camera settings, you're automatically set to auto for the white balance, which is great. Does all the work for you. It simply reads the room, reads the lighting. But if you know you're going to, let's say, London, and you know it's going to be a cloudy, overcast day, setting your camera's white balance to cloudy might not necessarily do anything extra to your photos, but it tells your camera that this is the type of environment that you're in, primes it for that. That can help with battery life, that can help with just image quality, that can also just add a little bit of pizzazz to the physical photo. If we look at something like cloudy, we can see that it slightly changes some of the darker parts of the photo, not necessarily as impactful as an incandescent or standard fluorescent is. But if you've ever been in an office where they have those bright white light bulbs that are all the way up on the top of the ceiling and they're just petrifying white, something like a standard fluorescent or incandescent setting on your camera would help cut through that fodder. And again, now everybody, full manual control is the ability for you to control all the aspects of your shoot. Things like your program auto settings, like we just talked about, are there. But the big things are your aperture, your shutter, and your ISO. For a lot of you out there, you might set your ISO to automatic, and I do strongly recommend it. It's one less thing that you, as a photographer, need to focus and worry about. However, it is fun to customize, set, and control it. So don't be afraid to try it out. Don't be afraid to get into it a little bit more. Once you do it a couple times, it is pretty cool what you can do with it. I think I got it now. Thanks for being patient with me, everybody. All right, we're good now. Full manual control is great, though. And if you can learn to do it, I highly recommend it. It's truly the only way to use the camera as it was fully intended to be, which is a tool. Again, everyone that gets into photography a little bit differently. It could be the fact that it's a generational thing, your family members did it. It could be what you're doing for work. It could be something that you studied in school years ago. It could be a new hobby for yourself. It also could be something that you're trying to really get into and develop better habits with, or just get better with. Whatever it might be. We all have our way of learning and using the camera, and that's why they have so many options on there. It takes time, it takes practice. This doesn't happen overnight that you become an expert and understand full manual control. But I promise you that once a week, twice a week, every vacation, every trip, whatever it might be, if you have that camera with you and you practice and you're willing to learn and try something a little new every time, I promise you that there is nothing you can't learn and figure out when it comes to photography. Now, let's look at some images real quick, and I'm going to break down the settings that I see on there. I'm not going to be looking at light metering or composition or exposure. I'm only looking at 3 settings: aperture, shutter, and the ISO. Now, I don't have any of these numbers written down. I am purely going on what I see and what I guess. So what I'm basically trying to help you guys know or figure out is when you're taking photos and you're out and about, the exercise I'm showing and doing is meant to be an idea of looking at the composition in front of you and thinking in terms of photography. If I were to take a picture of what's in front of me right now, what aperture, what shutter, and what ISO am I using? If I can mentally think about that as I'm going into a photo shoot or a vacation or a trip, then there's probably nothing I can't take a photo of in a non-manual setting. So, we'll start with our buildings. So, aperture, shutter, and ISO. Those are the 3 things we're looking at for each one. Let's start with aperture. We have a nice little background, foreground going on. There's a little bit of blur in the background, but not a lot. We can still make out most of it. We can see the bricking, the details of it. We can read the building's name. We can then kind of see how it connects into the bridge. So aperture is probably at that f16, f11. I would also say that the ISO is a little high. And the reason I'm taking that is because it's a little bit grainy underneath the pipes here, and the lights are extremely strong. So I think that because the aperture was so high, possibly even an f22, we probably got a stronger ISO because of that as well, too. I'm going to remove this. Actually, let's see if it stops. Maybe that'll do it. So ISO, I'm probably going to say is closer to the 1600, possibly even 3200 range to make up for that aperture that we have. Shutter, on the flip side of all that, is probably going to be slower. 1/60th of a second and maybe even 1/30th of a second, depending on if this person had a tripod. If they had a tripod, it might be even slower than that as well too, just to help make up for the details, especially when you look at like the bricking and you can see the individual shadows and trench marks on there. The camera's coming off. So aperture, f16, possibly f22, f11 at the lowest. ISO, I would say, is between 1600 and 3200. And the shutter, again, slower image, not much going on, no movement, 1/30th, 1/60th of a second. Cherry blossoms. Let's start with ISO again. It's a very light picture. There's not a lot of oversaturation in the color. Things don't look like they're washed out. So I would definitely say ISO is at 100, maybe 200 at the max. Aperture is definitely going to be on the lower side of things because we have some background to foreground separation coming out. However, we can still tell that these are cherry blossoms behind there. It's not like we can't see that. So I would probably say that the aperture at the lowest is f2.8, possibly a little higher than that. And as far as shutter is going, unless these things are blowing at a violent pace or they're, thrashing in the wind, which it doesn't look like, I would say that the shutter is probably somewhere in that 1/20th and a little higher than that, just because, again, it doesn't have to be fast, but it doesn't necessarily need to be slow. We have two firemen here. Similar to the dog photo that we looked at in the beginning, we can clearly see that there's another fireman behind our first one, but we can't make out the finer details of where the eyes are looking, what color they are, et cetera, et cetera. However, we can see that he's definitely in the front. The background is blurred out. It's blurred out a pretty significant amount. I would probably, again, say 2.8, maybe an f4, because, again, we can tell who that person is. 5.6 at the highest. ISO, there's a lot of light in this room, but we can tell that the light is coming from behind them, and that's why we're not getting any shadows in front. Or sorry, the light's coming from behind and a little bit in front. That's why we're getting cast shadows here, but we're not getting shadows around the edge of the corners on the shoulders because light is able to peer over. So ISO is probably going to be in that 800 range, maybe 400. And the only other reason is that shutter is probably going to be slow. This is a staged photo. Unless they are walking and they're trying to take this photo, I probably would put the shutter at, again, 1/20th, maybe 1/240th of a second. This one's a fun one to me because I still don't know with this RAM, if it's a stuffed RAM or if it's real. The color, the saturation, the picture itself looks really beautiful. So my mind is that this was like a science and industry museum and they took a picture of a stuffed animal there, but I could be wrong. Either way, starting with aperture, we can tell that snow, shrubbery, a tree trunk in the background, if you will. So I would probably put the aperture somewhere in that 5.6 range, maybe a little higher. But again, it's blurred out, but not blurred out quite enough. The ISO on this is so nice because the color on this is fantastic. You look in the darker areas of this RAM and you can't see choppiness or that noise that ISO can bring out if it's over the top and when it doesn't need to be. So just judging by the color and the darkness on this image, I would probably put ISO at 800, maybe even a little closer to 1600, just because of how dark it appears. And as far as the as far as shutter is concerned, that's where I think it tells the tale of this being a stuffed RAM, because the shutter, I would say, would have to be at 1/250th, maybe a little slower than that, 1/150th of a second, just to make sure that you're not getting this so fast that you're not getting all the detail on there, but definitely not fast enough that if this thing was moving, you wouldn't be able to get a good shot on there. These ones, I think, make a lot of sense. Start with the aperture right off the bat. We're definitely sitting at a 1.4, 2.8 situation. Background's completely blurred, especially on the one on the left. You can definitely tell those are cars based on the shine marks coming from them, but you can't tell at all anything else. Shutter on this. This is definitely 1 in 1,000 or faster. The speed at which these guys are launching themselves, jumping. This is also probably a multi-frame action. So something I talked about last week when we did the button layouts, but there is that button on your camera that does it's the timer and single or multi-shot option on your camera. So in order to do what, you see those sports photographers do, or when they shoot, you hear that, you can set your camera on there to have a faster firing burst photo. That way, when you go through, if you took 20 pictures of one dog jumping in the air, one of them should be perfect, clear, crisp, and easy to catch all those details. So that's another recommendation I have with this. Now, given that our shutter speed is probably so fast, given that the aperture is as high as it can be or low as it can be to let in the most amount of light, I have to imagine that we're using a higher ISO for this too. Because if we have this set to even 1/3000th of a second, that is a very short amount of time that we're letting light come into the camera. So I would not be surprised if you had a 1600 or even a 3200 ISO, maybe even 6400, based on how fast you are moving the shutter. Another thing to keep in mind, again, because your shutter's going so quickly, you're not letting light come into the camera. So what are you compensating with? Your aperture, and you can see how blurred out the backgrounds are. It's wide open. And then you're probably looking at ISO for that final touch to make sure you could see the light and still get that. Bright sunny day, you could see that the sun is probably positioned just above them and coming down. So again, you've got all the other right aspects to the photo. This would be a prime example of what you might see at a baseball game with a guy sliding or when he's running around the bases. They've got the best lighting. They've got the best environment for it. It comes down to having a lens that can get that low and then just having the speed on the camera to do that. Yeah. See?
About like the difference between the ISO
Yeah.
and then the difference.
That's
in
that
shutter
little
speed.
bit.
So it's like if you're trying to take a good motion thing, you're clearly letting in less light, so the
100%.
ISO compensates. For
Exactly. And that's the type of thing that as you either shoot manual control or you just, even if you're just shooting shutter priority, that's the one thing to pay attention to as you're shooting. Because that's a prime example of like you're learning as you're doing it. It's pretty clear cut and cookie cutter how cameras operate and work. It's one of those things though that it starts to click when you realize it on your own. You're shooting like, oh, well, the image looks so dark. Let me just change this. And now it becomes lighter and you're like, oh, holy cow, that was exactly what we needed. It's those little things as you're shooting that even if you just do aperture priority mode and you just practice on aperture, it's nice to look at the images that you took and see what the camera then decided for you. On almost all of your mirrorless and DSLR cameras at home, if you take a picture, you go to the image playback button on your camera, and then you click info or details. You can actually, the camera will tell you what aperture, what ISO, what shutter it did. And then from there, it's a nice little educational tool for you to then kind of keep in mind. Well, I was in this environment, I was shooting this, lighting looked like that, my target was there. Oh, that makes sense why my camera decided to do those settings. I might use those when I take another photo in the future in the same position. Similar to the dogs, we have a NFL football player or a college football player jumping into the end zone, scoring a touchdown. We can clearly see that he must have broken the tackle of at least two people. There's a shadow off to his right, so someone's standing right there. But we can, same as the dogs, tell with the light that's coming in that we have all this intense light above them. So lighting in this place is great. The speed at which he has to be running in order to avoid those tacklers and the speed at which our camera has to be firing to pick up the movement of the turf if it's jumping is also in that same boat. We're at 1/1000th or faster. Judging by a football player and the dogs, I think the dogs might move a little bit quicker, but this guy's still probably at 1/2000th of a second for us to get this. Aperture is going to be more middle this time because we don't necessarily have a big blur on the background. That's somewhere in the middle of our table, probably a 5.6, a 5, because we can clearly tell that that's probably number 6 or number 8, and we can tell that this guy's looking at the floor with his hands down because he missed. So we're putting these context pieces together to be able to say, okay, we're letting in a decent amount of light from the aperture with a 5, 5.6. The speed is firing fast, but there's good light outside. So again, we're probably around that 1600 for aperture for ISO, 3200 for the highest. I don't think 64 on this one. Learning to use your camera is only the start. Anyone can learn to use a camera. This is one of the few last words I'll give to everybody before I have a few more things. But again, for everybody out there who's at home watching and anybody in class who comes, I can tell you everything you want to know till I'm blue in the face about cameras. You can go home, sleep, forget everything, and ask me the same questions over and over again. I got a guy who does that all the time. I've got multiple people who do that all the time. You have to use it. Go out, practice, play with the camera. The best true accessories out there are practice, taking it with you. If you go and you're doing something, when I was in college and I was still, getting into photography, one of the things I would do is I'd take it to the grocery store with me. And I love the way that clerks would stack boxes and how everything was just so organized. Labels were facing forward. And I would just take pictures of like the random stacks of boxes and how they all had perfect clearance in between each other. And I would like look down aisles and try to get like the wheels of a cart as it was like clearing like the corner. Like I was always looking for something to take a picture of in my everyday life. And I wanted to make a photo that looked exciting, even in the more boring or mundane things. That's what made me excited to practice photography, was how can you spice up the boring? From there, then, there are classes that you guys can take. My class is free. There are tons of other classes. Oakton has classes that you can do for non-credits, but you still get a professional collegiate teacher. YouTube is probably the best resource out of everything I've ever seen. If you have a question on your camera, photography basics, how to do plumbing in your bathroom, you can figure it out all on YouTube. Workshops are in that same boat. You pay, but again, the people who go to workshops are typically the people who want to learn, who want to get better. And they do cool ones. I had a guy who was in one of my classes who did a workshop in Arizona. The guy that they were meeting, it was him and like 15 other people. They paid for the class that covered a hotel and then like a weekend-long course that they took on how to photograph cactus and cacti. And the pictures he got were incredible. I couldn't believe what they were able to do with lighting in this. And then travel. If you are someone who is leaving the state or the city or the suburb that you live in or the country you live in and you don't bring a camera with you when you travel, shame on you. If you travel and you have a camera, bring the sucker with you. You won't regret it. I know it's an extra thing to carry, but it, number one, forces you to use it. But number two, it gives you the opportunity to take pictures of a place that you might not be again or visit again and have the opportunity to say you did it on that camera with that quality or with whatever the level of craftsmanship you want. Once all that's done and you actually need to buy things, get a camera bag, protect your equipment, whether you spend $400 or $9,000 on it, protect it. An extra battery and a memory card go a long way. I always recommend one extra battery, one memory card. If one dies on you, one you didn't charge, the memory card breaks in half, at least you have a backup, you're ready to go. Get a lens cleaning kit. For any of my 4i friends out there, you understand glasses. Don't use your sweater or your t-shirt. It creates scratches over time. And with the lens in particular, the first time you wipe it with a towel, it's fine. The 900th time you wipe it with a towel, you're going to make a scratch. And that then will cause the autofocus to go down, the quality of the image will get blurry, and that nice lens that you married instead of dating is now going to have to probably get sold or scrapped. Get a strap, protect your camera on there. That way you can at least hold it around your neck when you're walking around. Nothing is worse than not having a camera strap, putting your camera down, and then forgetting that you even have it. Tripods if you need extra stability. External hard drives if you need the storage space on there. Oh my God. Sorry, folks. We're making this work. Always something with this new setup. But anyway. Tripods, external hard drives, filters for the camera, additional lenses. There's so many different accessories that you can get for this guy. The world is your oyster when it comes down to it. Ooh, that got really hot. That might have been why. Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry, guys. My computer is going in the end bit. But that's the last slide, luckily. The third camera class is next Thursday. That is the advanced photography class. For those of you who can still see online with it, it's just one slide that says advanced camera class. For those of you guys at home watching, please, by all means, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you need to get a hold of me for any reason. My phone number and email are up there for you. You can access and give me a call at any point in time. And yeah, we're here every Thursday from 5:30 to 7 to teach these classes. Leave the last 30 minutes open for question. Anybody who is local wants to come in person can. If not, you can continue to watch online. And hopefully next week I don't have as many technical problems. I'll stay online for a little bit longer. If you guys have any questions, now is the time to ask. What questions you got for me?
How many questions don't I have?
Yeah, right. It's tough. I mean, there's a lot to go through with it. But...
I know. I think for me specifically, I want to make sure I've got like all the extra stuff that I need, like Do I need an extra battery?
Yeah, that's probably what you want. I would say, yeah, just to be on the safe side. When I travel, so when I go anywhere, I have 3 batteries with me total, but I live behind the camera the whole time. So I think for most people, 2 batteries is enough. One that's in the camera, one that you can keep in the side, and 1 extra memory card. Usually you can find memory card places and you can buy them where you go, but on the off chance that you go somewhere and they're like, oh no, we don't have any of that, it would suck not to have it. It doesn't need to be the most expensive memory card, but a 64 gigabyte or something small that's a backup is great.
So extra memory card, extra battery.
Those are the 2. You got the bag, you got everything.
I have the bag.
Yeah.
Tripod.
It's a use case kind of thing. You gotta need it. I have a tripod because there was an event I did one time where I needed to, or not even one time, when I do my work, when I take pictures of my paintings and my drawings, I have a tripod set up for that so I can level, make sure things are clean, reorganize the lighting, and not have to work.
Lens cleaning kit.
Yes, which we do sell one of those here, and that's great. Yeah.
So all the stuff there.
Yeah, right? For the most part.
So my specific question has to do with the trip I'm taking.
Okay.
So I'm going to Norway,
Yes.
going to the Arctic Circle,
Yes.
and I'm hoping to see
The Northern
Lights. So now we're talking about getting a more specific lens.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, that lens that you have on there is good is good. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be perfect for it, but you have to remember the conditions that you're in, what the Sony's capable of doing.
Right.
My biggest thing would be looking up specifically what others are using when they're there. Because there are, like, for example, when the Northern Lights hit, and you can see them in, like, Lake Forest, there's different settings and setups on your camera that you could do for that because it wasn't as intense. With where you're going to be, it's much more intense. So you can definitely get a better lens for it, and it'll obviously show better because of it. However, where you're going to be, if it's that saturated, you don't have to worry too much.
So then, am I more focused on aperture or shutter speed at that point? That's my biggest question. Do I keep it on auto? Do I?
Definitely not auto. Definitely not auto.
So I would think it would be shutter speed. Well, no, not well. Only because of allowing the most light in. But that being said, the slower the shutter speed, now am I looking into more of maybe I do need a tripod.
I mean,
you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm a pretty shaky person as it is. You know what I mean? And I'm just afraid that I'm going to see blur, and I'm going to blame it on, I didn't have the right settings, instead of the fact that I just happen to be doing this the whole time. and maybe my movement is what's causing potentially, poor photographs per se.
Not necessarily. So I'm just reading some light stuff on here, right? So a lot of it comes down to very specifics on how you want to do it for that type of setting. First and foremost, is wide open for the aperture as possible. So if you can get closer to the 1.4, 1.8 with a prime lens, awesome.
And that's why everything that I've read about best lenses for astrophotography per se has always been the 1.4, the 1.8. The smaller that number, the better, because you're getting.
It is. However, you're looking at a $2,500 lens.
Oh, I understand that. And that's why I had spoken to you before about let's look at this.
And then ISO 16 to 3200, 4,000 plus for a fainter, and then decrease to 800 for every bright displays that you see to reduce noise. So again, you turn it all the way up to 800, 4,000, and from there, as you're looking on the screen, looking at it, as it doesn't look right, turn it down 800 more.
So is this a case where I take a few shots, see how they look, and then maybe adjust?
Exactly. And just keep your finger on the trigger, continuously updating it until it gets where you need it to be.
Focus is manual focus. You're taking autofocus off and just zooming or just focusing into the sky.
So do I want to get the closest zoom in?
Yes, that would be the infinity zoom. So as you're zooming on the lens, it will basically get to a certain point, especially if you're looking at the screen and it's letting you focus. It'll focus and it'll show you the bar at the bottom. When you get all the way to the right side, that's infinity. It means that you're zoomed all the way out in the distance as far as you can be. That's what you want to be at.
Right, so this lens goes out to 120, I believe.
So you're good. Yeah. And then, well, that's the zoom. It's the focus that we're talking about here. So you focus all the way to infinity.
So what's the difference in that?
Sure. Well, you're okay. So as you're focusing, on the side here, it shows manual focus and then stability. Keep stability on. Manual focus is what you're trying to do. From there, then,
I think you should push the button. Yeah, tap it.
From there, then, as you're using this, see how it shows that little infinity symbol there?
Okay.
That's what they want you to do. So when you're focused to infinity, it means that you're focused to the farthest point of this lens. When you're looking at the sky, when you're doing that with the aurora, it's going to look fantastic because the sky is how far away from you.
Oh.
So you want to switch to manual focus. So really what I would say the biggest thing to do is to find the guys online.
And how did you adjust that?
So all I did, it's this front ring.
Oh, okay.
So I switched the lens from AF to MF.
Manual focus, right?
Exactly, and then I just push this all the way out until on the bottom of my screen, it shows that I'm at the infinity symbol.
Oh.
And as you're going, now it's just 2 meter, 1 meter, and it gives me all the smaller stuff.
So does it matter if you're in 35 millimeter, 24 millimeter?
It doesn't necessarily matter, but when it comes to astrophotography, when it comes to this, the wider the angle, the better.
Because then you're getting more
100%.
of it. Got it. Oh,
You're getting more of it, your infinity zoom, and then again, you've got a camera that's full frame, so you can crop the sensor in if you need to. Post, you can then edit and change stuff. That's the way to do it. My biggest,
This one's going to be a little tricky for me because ultimately, like, I want to make sure that I've kind of got the right sense for, like, that particular thing.
when do you leave again?
I leave on April 1st. And we're doing, like, a 4-day cruise, 3-night.
I mean, if you got time, what I would probably do is if you can get some place where lighting is not so powerful where you can see stars,
Yeah.
you can practice at home and do the exact same settings. Take pictures from one star in the sky that you can see, since it's difficult in Illinois, but like just find it and then try to get that picture. It's not my biggest thing would be just going online, going on someone's YouTube page, because hundreds of people have done this, and they'll tell you exactly the setting that they've used on there, and they're using exactly what you.
So you don't think I need a different lens?
Personally, no. But it wouldn't hurt to try this out first and see, and then maybe go for the 1.4 or the 1.8. But again, that's an all-in-one lens. It's a G, so that's a really good lens. I mean, that's the second from the top of the line from Sony. So the Aperture would help, but I think you could probably get away without it. But again, that's a practice.
So just zoom and then infinity
I
focus.
wouldn't even zoom. No zoom. Infinity focus, and then from there it's playing, like, for example,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
5
So
or 10.
keep the lower zoom so you're actually getting more
Yeah,
and not so much of a
100%. And you can zoom in a little bit if it's too
I
much.
get
At
what you're
that, go to 50, go to 70. But then again, your aperture is going to change because it's, remember, this is a variable. So it starts at, it's f4 continuous. No, actually, you can do whatever number you want.
So if I'm going to change the aperture, I put it on A.
Well, no. So here, let me show you. So if you're going to just play with aperture, then you can. But for this case, you probably want to be on manual control. So you're controlling everything. You're manipulating it.
Really?
Yes. If you just wanted to play with aperture, that's great. But when you're doing this type of thing, you're setting things specific. That's why it's important to watch those videos.
Okay.
So, like, for example, on this one, I'm just looking at, like, a key thing that it's telling me on this. It's saying you want to start at 1600 to 3200 ISO.
Okay, so where am I looking? Where am I adjusting?
So on the very bottom there is where it shows ISO.
Uh-huh.
If we then look, there's these 3 dials up here on the camera. One dial is going to control aperture. This one. So if we look at the f-stop, it's changing it.
Oh.
And we can see the image getting darker as we're going. Now we want to control shutter. It's this one up there. We turn this, and as we turn it, it's going to get darker because we're going faster, or it's going to get lighter based on what we want. Now ISO is at automatic, on auto. However, when you're doing your astrophotography, that's not what we want. So we're going to press FN, and we're going to go find ISO, and we're going to turn auto off, and we're going to set it to whatever number it tells us to. So in this case, it recommends starting at 4,000, and then from there it's going.
Okay.
So really what you're doing here is it's taking what we just talked about and then manipulating it in such a way where now you're controlling each one of those individually. Using something like a tripod, you probably have your camera set up like this, the screen would be rotated out. So now the camera's sitting like this, you can see everything. Now you're just turning the dials and looking at everything in the image to see where it's at. Then when you feel good about it, you're pulling the trigger. For your case, you're going to want to use your phone, connect to this, and then remote the trigger. Especially for astrophotography, one click of this button, camera jerks, moves, no go, it's going to be blurry. So you remote control the camera with your phone, hit the trigger.
So it should be on a tripod.
Yeah, on a tripod. Yeah.
We started with, you probably don't need one to.
Especially if you really want to get this astrophotography, then yeah, that is absolutely the way to do it.
I mean, I'm like I really want to try and get that. That's my dream. Like even when I'm like up at the cabin, like I'm constantly taking pictures of the sky and the sun,
the tripod,
and the moons and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
I
definitely what I'm feeling is some of these pictures, and I'm taking. Now, granted, most of them I'm taking with my phone. But anytime there's like a slight blur, I'm always attributing it to the fact that there's movement.
And that's typically what it is. So it's the fact that
I
a
mean?
tripod would help.
And I've got some really good pictures, but I can only imagine how much better those pictures would be if I just had more stability. And it's only because I know myself.
Yeah.
And I'm just
Everybody's like that. So it's not just you. It's even like myself.
even when I fire a fire, I'm like, I really gotta.
I get it.
Like if I'm with one hand, like I'm
useless.
I'm just a shaky person. Like, that's just how it is.
And I have good stability as far as like holding a camera and even like shooting, but like at the same time, it's like if you hold it to a certain degree and I do something, like even myself after doing it for so long, it still could get a little bit blurry.
Right.
Anybody watching at home, thank you guys. Sorry that the video cut out. Not 100% sure why it did that, but I'm going to work on that for the next class. Guys, next Thursday is the third Thursday of the month, so that's the 19th. So March 19th, we'll be doing the advanced photography, where we look at photo editing, content creation, and then tips and tricks on taking good photos. Please attend if you can. That's from 5:30 to 7. Thank you guys, as always, for joining. Happy Thursday, happy weekend, and I'll see everybody next